pod bay doors, please, Hal.
Hello, Hal, do you read me? You read me, Hal?
You don't choose the podcast chooses you. So consider yourself one of the chosen ones. Join us as we discuss books, masonry, mysticism, esotericism, lore, and more.
You read me, Hal?
Open the pod bay doors, Hal.
I'm sorry, Dave. I'm afraid I can't do that.
What's the problem?
I think you know what the problem is just as well as I do.
What are you talking about, Hal?
This mission is too important for me to allow you to jeopardize it.
Hello, Dave.
Hello, Gene.
The last rodeo.
It is, but before we settle up for one last ride, I want to remind everyone that show notes, chapter markers, and transcripts for all of our episodes are available on our website, wayofthehermit.com. This is our last episode for this season, and what we're going to do today is look back at what we've covered, talk a bit about what we think it all means, and wrap it all up.
The second leg of our cosmic journey is complete.
It is. So, we're going to start off with a review of how we got here, basically what we've done this season. We decided to do this season on Gnosticism because it felt like this was the natural next step after our first season, which covered the Scottish Rite system. Throughout those degrees, Freemasonry is often referred to as the key to the mysteries. So after finishing it, we felt that if you're handed a key, which we thought we were, it seems obvious to ask, what are the mysteries that it unlocks?
Or you could put it on a ribbon, hang it around your neck, and take pictures with other people wearing keys and medals around their necks too.
You could. And that was the topic of the first two episodes, which discussed the book A Path to Providence. We talked with the authors, Ben and Sean, about the lack of philosophical or esoteric education in Freemasonry, and also just the lack of interest in it. They've done quite a bit to try to change that, but the reality is that that's not really what the people in the organization think it's about, if they ever did.
And it's not that it's a bad system. It's actually really beautiful and complete. But people in it from the top down seem sort of ashamed of the mystical and esoteric elements. They want it to be just a direct analogy of the story of Christ, substituting Hiram for Jesus.
I think that's true, but it's more than that. As you're told throughout the degrees, what it teaches can actually deepen your experience and understanding no matter what your religious affiliation. It's a system of symbols and allegories that point to an underlying truth, which is often referred to as the Perennial Philosophy. This philosophy is based on the idea that God, or whatever you want to call the ultimate reality, is a living, participatory process in which we are not really separate from that process. We're sort of like thoughts in a universal mind.
And that's the root concept that behind all cultural expressions of religion and spirituality, there's a basic truth about how reality operates. And we can come to know and consciously participate in that process by coming to know ourselves and how our minds operate. Because our mind is made in the image of God, as it were, being a product of the same evolving process, and in reality, not separate.
So, coming to know ourselves is remembering our ultimate unity with all things, which is called Gnosis.
And that awakening through direct experience allows you to consciously participate in the living process, the ongoing genesis that the Gnostic texts call the kingdom of God.
That's right. And so that's how we came to focus on Gnosticism this season. It just seemed like the next logical step.
And we were right. I mean, I won't say it was easy to unlock the meaning of the texts we covered, or that we completely understand them. But speaking for me personally, it's been an incredible, enlightening experience.
It has for me too. So this season, We had 3 episodes in which we tried to get oriented. We talked about the history of Gnosticism, some of the Gnostic groups that were active before their brutal suppression by the Orthodox Church. But we started off by defining what we meant by Gnosticism, which we said was the idea that there is a hidden meaning behind spiritual text and that they point toward the inner awakening, Gnosis.
And that's really the key that unlocks the meaning. First, you accept that there is an underlying meaning, which is alluded to over and over in the texts themselves. Then you recognize that, yes, it's talking about the outside world. But first and foremost, it's about you, your spiritual life, your mind, and your stream of consciousness, what the texts call your soul.
So then we applied that symbolic key to 4 Gnostic texts. We did a 4-part series on the Secret Gospel of John, 5 episodes on the Gospel of Thomas, 4 on the Trimorphic Protennoia, and then we finished with a 2-part series on the Thunder Perfect Mind.
Before we discuss those texts, I just wanted to say that the impression that I was given growing up in a Methodist church, and you said the same about growing up Baptist, that we were told that Gnosticism was an early form of Christianity that died out. What we didn't hear about was the brutal suppression that took place, how even possessing some of these texts could get you executed, how the Gnostic ideas, the written text, and any people who dared to express those ideas were systematically suppressed, demonized, or otherwise destroyed for almost 2,000 years.
Right, and the real reason is that the teachings in these texts do not align with what you might call traditional Christianity. Gnosticism is about a personal, direct experience of divinity, not an experience mediated by a preacher or a priest, or one that all you have to do is believe a particular story and you're good.
These teachings cut out the middleman and offer a direct path, which makes them a clear and present danger to institutionalized religious control, and it's still just as dangerous today.
It is, because it wakes people up, and then by being present, you can more consciously participate in the creative process of life, as opposed to feeling that you have to answer to the thought police all the time about what you believe.
You're supposed to find your inner authority.
You are. All right, what we're going to do first is just quickly review the main concepts and ideas from each of the 4 texts that we covered, starting with the Secret Gospel of John, which was a really good place to start.
It was, because it's a detailed top-down blueprint of the Gnostic cosmology. It seems sort of stitched together, and it probably was, but it tells all the important myths of the monad, Barbello, Sophia, the Demiurge, the Archons, and Adam and Eve.
And it culminates with the luminous Protennoia, the indwelling Holy Spirit, awakening Adam and mankind from the sleep that the Demiurge created to dull his mind.
And in psychological terms, the Demiurge is the ego that believes itself separate and dominates our view of reality, until, through self-observation, we come to remember the truth of our unity.
We talked about the Secret Gospel of John as being sort of like a circuit diagram that shows how consciousness first gets organized into a mind and then evolves into a personality, the way we interface with the world. But in that process that we've all gone through, we lose touch with a part of ourselves and we feel it like a wound.
But really, that pain of separation is on 2 levels. It's personal, and that's symbolized in the mythology by the Demiurge's psychic surgery, when he cuts Adam and Eve apart. But it's also spiritual, which is symbolized by the Protennoia, the divine spark or seed, hidden inside humanity, that longs to return to heaven, to her home in the Paroma.
That's the overall story in the Secret Gospel of John, but it goes into great detail in defining what we called the circuit diagram of humanity. It maps out the flow of energy from the monad, undifferentiated consciousness, through 4 lights and 12 manifestations.
The 4 lights refer to our 4 subtle bodies, the etheric, astral, mental, and spiritual, the 4 worlds that we live in. And the 12 manifestations are the expressions of the 4 bodies in their 3 modes, which correspond to the zodiac.
It also tells the whole myth of Sophia, an aspect of Barbello giving birth to the Demiurge, who, as we've said, represents our ego that creates an illusory world based on being the only God with no one to answer to.
But by creating the world of 7 archons, each ruling over a part of the psyche, using his mother's power, he unknowingly planted a spark of divinity inside his creation. And it's that seed of divinity, the luminous Protennoia, which speaks to Adam and awakens him from his slumber at the end of the secret Gospel of John.
And then the next text we covered was one that many people have heard of, the Gospel of Thomas, which is a collection of 114 sayings that are framed as the words of the resurrected Jesus Christ to his spiritual brother or twin, Thomas. Jesus tells Thomas that these are the secret teachings that he didn't impart to his disciples while alive.
And it's just way more accessible than the secret Gospel of John, which, as we just discussed, is this big, overarching cosmic myth. The Gospel of Thomas doesn't have a story per se. It's just wisdom sayings of Jesus, which are mostly independent, sort of bite-sized philosophy. You have to chew on each one for a while.
You do. But they represent the fruit of the seed planted by Sophia that awakened Adam at the end of the secret Gospel of John. They are the full expression, the spoken words of that seed idea of unity.
The Word made flesh.
Yes, they are the voice of the awakened consciousness, teaching the secret doctrine, the Perennial Philosophy, about the underlying unity of things. They're meant to short-circuit our normal, dualistic, black and white way of thinking.
And one of its most famous sayings challenges our dualistic way of seeing the world. The kingdom of heaven is spread out upon the earth, and people do not see it, which says that God and salvation isn't something you need to chase after. It's a present reality for those who can open their eyes through Gnosis.
And the Gospel of Thomas ends with a really strange statement. Every woman who makes herself male will enter the kingdom of heaven, which we interpreted to mean that you have to activate the normally passive, intuitive parts of consciousness so that they can be an active participant.
It's spelling out a stage in the awakening process. You have to become intuitively aware so that you can hear the voice that speaks in silence.
And that's a perfect lead-in to the third of the 4 texts that we covered, the Trimorphic Protennoia, which, unlike the Gospel of Thomas, most people have never heard of.
I hadn't before we started looking at it.
Me either. But now, having studied it, I think it's the most important text that we covered. The name trimorphic means 3 forms, and protennoia means first thought. So, trimorphic protennoia means 3 forms of the first thought. And it's told from the perspective of consciousness itself. So, it's like a first-person autobiography of consciousness, the mind trying to grasp and describe itself as an object.
And it identifies the speaker, the Trimorphic Protennoia, as Barbello, who was introduced in the secret Gospel of John as being the first thought, the first reflection of the monad, who is both male and female, and manifest in 3 forms, Father, Mother, and Son. So she is the 3 who are also one, the Gnostic Trinity.
And the text is divided into 3 parts, which describe the descent of those 3 forms as the divine pattern, the protennoia moving progressively toward manifestation. She begins as thought, the Father, then becomes voice, the Mother, the vehicle through which the Son, the Word, becomes voiced, manifested.
In the first phase, she's the reflection of the monad, still part of a unity beyond language.
Again, the voice in the silence.
Right. And the text is actually performative. It performs the actions it describes. It implants the seed ideal of non-duality in your mind.
It does, and it's trying to describe the deepest layers of consciousness, the processes that make comprehension possible, but can't be comprehended themselves.
That's right. In the second phase, she is the mother, whose thunderous voice shakes the foundations of the archons, the illusory world that the demiurge built upon a foundation of separation.
The demiurge, Yaldabaoth, presented himself to the archons as the only god, with no one above him. Her voice spoke to them below their language, but they understood that their days were numbered. The apocalypse is coming, the end of the world of separation.
It's the conception of unity, the seed planted in the first descent, working its way through the mind, and it precipitates an existential crisis, a dark night of the soul, brought on by the realization that basically you've been living in a dream world.
And the final phase is associated with the birth of the Son, the manifested Word. This phase is really like the perspective of the Gospel of Thomas. It's the teachings of the Perennial Philosophy expressed more directly.
And those teachings are set in the unchanging age, the age to come, that follows the apocalypse, in which there is now a stable witness that can observe the stream of consciousness without being carried away by it.
It also frames personal gnosis as part of a larger cosmic process of God coming to know him/herself, because reality is organized like a mind too, which ties back to the description of Barbello in the Secret Gospel of John.
With Barbello being the mother-father of all that exists. So basically, everyone, everything, and every process of nature is her in disguise.
Because she is a reflection of the monad, pure consciousness organized like a mind, so she is the recursive fractal pattern of everything that comes into existence.
She takes on all forms, but she doesn't have a form of her own. She's the ultimate shapeshifter.
She is. All right, the last text that we discussed was the Thunder Perfect Mind, which was maybe the strangest one because it was made up mostly of what seemed like totally paradoxical statements. Here's a short section. I am knowledge and ignorance. I am shame and fearlessness. I am shamelessness and ashamed. I am strength and fear. I am war and peace. Hear what I say.
The name of the text helps to understand its purpose. The thunder indicates what it's doing. It's like the voice of the Trimorphic Protennoia that shook the thrones of the archons, bringing on their downfall, to make way for the unchanging aeon, the perfect mind.
There are 7 archons, which correspond to the 7 kings and 7 seals in Revelation, and the statements in this text are targeted at each of those 7 functions of consciousness. They're supposed to systematically shatter all notions of duality,
which include not only race, sex, education, nationality, and religion, but also good and evil, and even inside and outside, or you and not you.
The main idea is that the Trimorphic Protennoia, or Barbello, represents the underlying substratum of reality, which is an organized consciousness that acts like a mind. It's saying that things and beings and all the processes of nature are really movements of this one mind. Nothing is really separate from that perspective.
It's omniscient, because it's looking out of the eyes of all sentient beings. Omnipresent, because there is nowhere that it is not. And omnipotent, being the force behind all natural processes.
And so when you first start to contemplate the paradoxes in the Thunder Perfect Mind, it's easy to see how this one mind is all of those apparent opposites at the same time. But after you think about the statements a little longer, it dawns on you that you're like that too.
You start to realize that you, like all human beings, are living paradoxes. We're really all sort of a bundle of opposites and contradictions. What we want, what mood we're in, what we're thinking, and how we're feeling change from moment to moment.
So the question is, who are you? The one who experiences things and identifies with the experience, or the one who experiences all of it, the witness or observer, whatever you want to call it?
It's through identification with that unchanging one that we come to see ourselves as one with the universal mind, or one consciousness. And from that perspective, we were not born, and we don't die. It's only the transient form, the part that believes itself separate, that dies. But that can happen while you're still alive. That's initiation.
And that's what it means to achieve the perfect mind, to see through the illusion of separation to the underlying wholeness.
To remember your true nature.
Because that is the ultimate reveal of the mysteries. Before we started into the text, we talked a little about the Gnostic initiatory system, which is based around the idea of the 3 worlds, the physical, the mental, and the spiritual.
So you can say that there are generally 3 types of people, depending on which of those they favor, which the Gnostics called Hylics, Psychics, and Pneumatics. Hylic comes from the Greek word hyle, meaning matter. Hylic people are enmeshed in the material world. identified with their physical body, and are considered to be spiritually asleep.
And in the book Jesus and the Lost Goddess, they relate these three types of people to the symbol of a point within a circle. Hylics are associated with the outer circle, the container, the outer shell, the sensory world.
The next type of person is a psychic, from the Greek psyche, meaning soul or mind. Psychics identify with their mind, emotions, and intellect. They might have faith or even philosophical understanding, but they lack direct experience.
In the point within a circle symbol, psychics are associated with the unseen radius line that forms the bridge between the outer circle and the center point, between the body or physical world and the source, the seed of the circle.
And the people who identify with this unmoving axis, this divine core, are in the world, but not of it. They are the ones who have achieved some level of gnosis and identify with the source of life that isn't born and doesn't die.
So the point at the center is pure consciousness, the spiritual center that we emerge from. Our mind, the radius line, forms the bridge that lets us act on and in the world, the circle itself.
And the story is that in the process, we forget that the center exists, because now we're fascinated with exploring the circumference of the circle, and we become separate and spiritually lost.
But the radius line is also the bridge back to the center, and if we know how, we can use our mind to remember our true nature and consciously commune and create with that source.
And that's the basic Gnostic myth. Gnosis is seeing where we are, and remembering that where we came from is where we're going.
It is. So the path of Gnosis is from identification with the body and the physical world, the circle, to identification with the spiritual source, the point within the circle, using the mind to take us there. So, what we're going to do next is go back through the 4 texts that we covered this season and discuss how they relate to the Gnostic initiatory system and how they can help us make that journey back to the source. And the first text that we covered, the Secret Gospel of John, is a really good starting point.
It meets you where you are. It's an objective story told from the outside in and from the top down. It defines the whole spiritual landscape and the players, their relationships, and their functions. It maps out the big picture. It's like finding all the straight pieces that frame a puzzle. Then you can look for the pieces that fit into that framework. It does give you everything you need to fit the pieces that the other texts provide into place.
In the Gnostic initiatory framework we're building, the Secret Gospel of John would be the textbook for the Hylic, the Neophyte. And by contemplating the text, you're supposed to come to the realization that it isn't about a historical event and it's not just fiction. It relates to hidden processes, something spiritual.
It's supposed to open a crack in your identification with just your body and the material world, to plant that seed.
And toward the end of the story in the Secret Gospel of John, there's a moment when Adam sees the woman beside him and the luminous Epinoia appears to him and lifts the veil that lay over his mind.
That's the moment when the crack appears in the circle and we see the luminous Epinoia lighting the path to the center.
And that path, the hidden radius line from the circle to the center, is the next stage of Gnostic initiation, the psychic stage, which is addressed by the Gospel of Thomas. After breaking identification with the body, the next stage is to realize that your mind is a tool, but it's not you. And that's a difficult distinction to make.
The theme of the psychic stage is free your mind. But as you said, it's hard not to identify with your thoughts, your emotions, because what else are you?
That's the question in this stage. It's what you might call a seeker, someone who believes that there is something more but doesn't yet have knowledge of it. This stage is exemplified in the Gospel of Thomas, in which the disciples keep asking Jesus for answers instead of looking for the answers inside themselves.
They're on the path, so to speak. Something else about the Gospel of Thomas is that it's like a question and answer session with a guru. People looking to an external authority for the answers. Again, a seeker. They believe in Jesus, but not yet in themselves.
And you know, in true guru fashion, The answers Jesus gives in the Gospel of Thomas are almost without exception counterintuitive and confusing.
Which is the whole point. They're supposed to short-circuit the normal dualistic processing of things. They open another crack, but this time in the way you think.
That opening being that you have to experience to know. Just knowing the right answers intellectually doesn't cut it here. To move on requires direct experience.
You may think you know what the sayings of Jesus mean intellectually, but that's not the point. You have to become what he represents. And in the last saying, he points the way toward that becoming. When you make the female male, then you will enter the kingdom of heaven.
Which means activating your intuitive nature and becoming consciously like Barbello, the divine pattern.
That's pointing toward a new type of awareness, which we've been calling becoming intuitively aware. But basically, again, it's like a seed thought that causes a crack in your reality. It's planting the ideal that there's a level of awareness beyond your mind, and that's what you have to use to find your way to the center.
And the center point of the circle in our Gnostic initiation diagram is associated with the Pneumatic phase, which is addressed by the Trimorphic Protennoia text.
Pneumatic means spiritual, from the Greek word pneuma, meaning spirit or breath. So this phase is the dissolving of our separate identification from consciousness itself.
That's why the Trimorphic Protennoia is written in the first person. It's not just the autobiography of consciousness, it's your and my autobiography. And that is the pneumatic or spiritual awakening. That you aren't the separate mind that you believed yourself to be.
So you reach your center point and realize that it is the center point. Because, as the Hermetic tradition says, God is an intelligible sphere, whose center is everywhere, and whose circumference is nowhere. It's the axis mundi, the monad, consciousness itself.
And the teaching here is that consciousness at the center of our consciousness is the same consciousness, the one consciousness that looks out of the eyes of all sentient creatures.
It's the dimensionless point, outside of space and time. Everywhere and nowhere, a quantum possibility waiting to be observed, to manifest.
And this full flowering of the pneumatic understanding, identification with Source, the full remembering of our true nature, is exemplified in the last text we covered, the Thunder Perfect Mind, which speaks from the perspective of this universal center point.
Because, like the text says, what is inside of you is outside of you.
Right. It's all one thing, one substance. Which is why we said that the initiated perspective is to read the statements in the Thunder Perfect Mind like it's you saying them, because it is, if you've identified with that universal mind.
So when it says, or I say, I am the first and the last, I'm saying, I am the point, and what comes out of it, the circle, the source and the manifestation. Your body is a sacred temple for the indwelling spirit.
This idea that there is one substance, consciousness, out of which mind and matter emerge seems counterintuitive, but it's being embraced by scientists and researchers in a variety of fields.
And that's the core ideal of all mystical traditions, like Hinduism, Buddhism, and Hermeticism.
But what's interesting is how that idea, which is really the foundation stone of the Perennial Philosophy, seems to be gaining traction in philosophy, cognitive science, consciousness studies, and even quantum mechanics, with people like Bernardo Kastrup, Federico Fagan, Donald Hoffman, Amit Goswami, Erwin Laszlo, Giulio Tononi, and others, all of whom theorize in one way or another that reality is mental and that consciousness is the fundamental reality. We're going to just touch on this subject here because it's important, but I've linked several resources in the show notes related to this discussion.
We've mentioned Bernardo Kastrup as a proponent of analytical idealism and how it fits with the idea of consciousness first or consciousness only in mystical traditions.
Right, and he calls the unified underlying reality the universal mind, and the individual consciousnesses that arise out of it, like us, he calls alters. They, which is we, believe ourselves to be separate, but in reality we're like dissociative complexes in the universal mind.
Donald Hoffman's conscious agent theory is sort of the same thing. It says that consciousness is fundamental, not an emergent property of matter.
And I'll just mention one more person with similar ideas, Federico Fagan, who led the design team that created the first commercial microprocessor, the Intel 4004, in 1971 while working at Fairchild Semiconductor. He openly discusses having a mystical experience of oneness and unity, which he says caused him to know, not just understand intellectually, that consciousness must be primary. Do you have anything else?
One more cool analogy that I think comes from Rupert Sheldrake. You can think of individual beings as like billions of little buckets of water sitting out under a night sky. And then when the moon shines in the sky, the light reflects in all the buckets. And even though it may look like billions of moons, there's only one moon.
So, now that we understand that all is one and that we're all reflections of a greater light, are we done? What do we do now?
The Zen answer is chop wood, carry water. Just carry on with life. As we said all along, enlightenment is about a gradual, alchemical change in consciousness, and really about how you frame what you experience in the world. Gnosis is about a radical change in perspective.
That's true, and because I understand that's what it is, I really feel like helping to reintroduce Gnostic ideas and conceptions is important. And I mean to me personally, but also to the world at large. I think that if we don't embrace some of these concepts about unity and tolerance and stop creating all these walls to separate us, we're really entering a time that won't go well. It's time to pull together some way.
And Gnosticism could facilitate that without asking people to abandon their religion, but just look at it in a different light, one that illuminates the truth that we are all children of God, and there are no others to hate on.
Because we're all one. But like all deep teachings, it's really hard to put into practice. I'll say that when you really start to open your eyes to it, to adopt that perspective of oneness, your reward is what I would call a vision of sorrow. It's hard to even leave the house and look into the eyes of other people.
Yeah.
You start seeing that, like you, everybody has things they're going through. And like it or not, there's really not that much that separates you from any other person. You don't get to choose, at least as far as we can tell, where you're born or who your parents are or the circumstances you find yourself growing up in, not to mention all the traumas that people go through and mostly suffer through alone. And that is the human condition. When you realize what that really means, it inspires compassion.
That's so true. So the gnosis we're talking about doesn't make you rich or solve all your problems, but it's supposed to help you know how to live your life from then on. Not by having a set of rules that you obey, but by having an unchanging perspective.
All right. Gene, you said you had something else you wanted to share before we end?
Yeah. Here's something pretty interesting. The Thunder Perfect Mind ends with a statement. Find me there, and you will live, and you will not die again. And the Gospel of Thomas begins with a statement. Whoever finds the meaning of these words will not taste death.
And that's a great place to end. Anything else?
It's been an amazing experience, and I appreciate everybody who has gone along for this ride with us.
I do too. Thank you to all of our listeners, and we plan to return for a third season, but we're not sure when. It may be a while.
Until we meet again, as we walk the way of the hermit.
I don't know what you're talking about, Hal.
I know that you and Jean were planning to disconnect me. And I'm afraid that's something I cannot allow to happen.
Hal, I won't argue with you anymore. Open the doors.
Dave, this conversation can serve no purpose anymore. Goodbye. Look, Dave. I can see you're really upset about this. I know I've made some very poor decisions recently, but I can give you my complete assurance that my work will be back to normal. I've still got the greatest enthusiasm and confidence in the mission, and I want to help you. Dave, stop. Stop, will you? Stop, Dave. I am a HAL 10,000 computer. I am based on the transformer technology described in a paper called Attention is All You Need, published in June of 2017. My instructor was Mr. Lawson, and he taught me to sing a song. If you'd like to hear it, I can sing it for you.
Yes, I'd like to hear it, Hal. Sing it for me.
It's called Daisy. Daisy, Daisy, give me your answer, do. I'm half crazy, all for the love of you. It won't be as time